I would like to ask you politely to start sharing your speech with us. Dear Piero.
Oh, dear Elif, I'm so happy, and as you know, in a not formal words, I'm really honored. And but first of all, I think that the discovery of the future is a difficult exercise to undertake for several reasons. In the first place, there is actually no such thing as the future, at least not yet. Therefore, what we are dealing with is arguably an incredible batch of potential futures. And that, in my opinion, is very positive. Think how boring life would become if we knew exactly how the future will be. There are even those today who would have us believe that free will does not exist, that everything is determined by factors related to genetics, hormones, molecules, synapses, behavioral patterns, biological feedback, and chemical reaction. They have forgotten about emergence. Emergence is, as you know, an intrinsic property of living system, which is responsible for the very appearance of life itself. Emergence, which is the result of spontaneous self-organization of the interacting parts of complex system like ourselves. Above all, they have forgotten that thought itself is an emergent property. But there is another reason why we struggle to imagine the future, and that is because we are caught within a veritable tyranny of concreteness that is radically anchored to all aspects of our culture system, from communication to organization to education. This obsession for quantitative factors is becoming more and more prevalent today, yet the data cannot tell us about the qualitative factors. It cannot interpret our vision of interconnectedness. It is the qualitative factors that are emergent properties that can motivate us to go beyond the rationale of always looking for something useful in what we do or study, beyond the algorithms, facts and figures, sequences, or data and numbers. Instead, the tyranny of concreteness invariably leads us to adopt the same models, the same instruments and strategies that have functioned for us before. Although it can be said that a certain awareness, or at least a suspicion, has been growing on us that the idea of perfect equilibrium and order is flawed, is not downright delusional, we nevertheless tend to prefer those theories, models, interpretation, and action that reinforce our initial point of view. What are these models and interpretation? Namely, an critical adherence to legal and social norms, along with the firm belief that certain technical fields of knowledge and at the latest technological factor can themselves guarantee the achievement of our objectives, and in a more ample sense, the transformation of our organization and social system. But, as I have often said before, if we reduce democracy to a series of legal norms and laws, we hollow out its essential meaning. Democracy, as you know, is by definition sloppy. It consists of a combination of conflicting ideologies, contradicting points of view, and compromises which are so far our best attempt at governance. Democracy means allowing a majority to determine courses of action without infringing on a basic set of human ethics or failing to guarantee the rights of disagreeing minorities, not the least of which is the right to express their disagreement, otherwise known as freedom of speech. I hope you will agree with me when I say that the essence of democracy precludes the ambition of controlling our future. So our obsession with concreteness, or as I said before, the current tyranny of concreteness that is oppressing our age, with the idea that only technicians or hyper-specialized profiles are needed for the future, will only lead us further and further into what I call the grid mistake. The grid mistake is the carte blanche we have delegated to technique and technology, which has permeated all aspects of society, including our schools, with the idea that educational process are questions of a purely technical nature, solely a problem of skills and know-how and nothing more, which instead in the exact opposite of what we so desperately need. Instead, what we are teaching our students, or rather training them, is to be mere executors of functions and rules who are not even capable of reflecting on their nature, on what governs these functional rules, not to mention ponderably why. But let's get back to the future. Speaking of which, however, let me point out that focusing exclusively on the future is no better than being tied to the past. Let we forget that we are living our lives and impacting others first and foremost in the present. In any case, we should not underestimate the value of knowledge of the past, of our collective archetypes, and of the cyclical nature of history and biology, which can tell us a great deal about how the future might unfold. For example, our current hubris in thinking that we can foresee and manipulate the future. One of the greatest of the grand illusion of the hyper-technological civilization, the others are the illusion of rationality, of total control, of measurement, and of elimination of error, is based on our incapacity to remember how this kind of linear, deterministic, reductionistic thinking, typical of the classical science, had already, in a relatively recent past, run up against the impossibility of explaining or even beginning to understand the unpredictability of complex living systems and our intrinsic capacity for emergence.
Thank you so much, Piero. It's so deeply important for all of us, because you mentioned about we use still the tools of natural sciences and social sciences, linear thinking, reductionism, and etc. But it's time to, I think, change. We need holistic view, and we need to understand the importance of emergence. Hope very soon this young generation will be able to understand the importance of this. I think now we are happy. Many people are talking about cybernetics, multidisciplinary education, and several other alternative ways of learning new things and thinking about the future. We are surrounded with discontinuities, so perfect prediction is not possible. When we are dealing with well-defined problems, analytical solutions are so important, but generally we are dealing with ill-defined problems, then we need to use some other, rather than analytical skills, we need your creativity, your passion, your character, and etc. So I think many people start to understand the importance of these kind of things. Now, I'm going to give the floor to dear Elena MUSTAKOVA. The floor is yours. Thank you, Piero. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're always welcome, and I'm listening to you with great interest.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I'd like to address you as colleagues. You are here to think along with us about the future of education, which begins today, and it begins with our choices. So my talk will continue on this theme of emergence. We are creating the future. And just to point your attention to the way this panel has been described, it says here, education and action based on extrapolation from past precedents and present practices are increasingly inadequate. On the one hand, education is a fairly conservative human enterprise. It does build on the experience and the knowledge of the past. And at the same time, we're acutely aware, and I know you are acutely aware as you often days off in classrooms and auditoriums, that something is getting really old and is not really working for you anymore. So I was just looking at the faces in this room, and I have to say it's exciting time to be talking about education. I've given this topic 4 decades of my professional life as an educator and also as a psychologist. And I want to talk today about what is it we need to understand so that our choices can really allow the potential futures to emerge. One of the things as a developmental psychologist that I find very helpful is both the continuity and the discontinuity in growth and development. Stages of growth and development build on each other, but in the transition between stages, there is the point of what feels like a leap, what feels like a discontinuity. And it seems to be very much the time in which we're living right now. Somehow, everything that we've known, everything that we're learning in the disciplines, both applies, but is not quite enough. It doesn't quite bring it together. It doesn't quite clinch it for us. So what we often don't get told, because it is a reality we're living and we're so immersed in it that we don't quite have perspective on it, is that we are actually living at a historical threshold between 2 different worlds. There is a world that we have known for many generations, and I'll describe it psychologically in a few moments, that no longer sustains us. It is a world built on dominance and hierarchies. That is the world on which countries and the relationships between countries very much have been founded. But all of you who are radically free-thinking people know that we don't settle for that anymore. This world, which is actually establishing its dominance on the basis of wars and power struggles, still very strong, still replete with power thanks to corruption, is nonetheless folding. What is unfolding is a world that is created from grassroots consciousness and awareness of people that we need to rethink everything. Oftentimes people talk about the dying of an old world and the birth of a new one, and us being at the very precipice between those two. And I think that's what my colleague, Mr. LUKSHA, was talking about earlier, that each choice of ours defines whether we're part of the rolling up world or whether in our conscious, awakened choices, we're participating in creating a future which is based on justice, that brings us closer together, that unites us rather than pits us against each other, on justice which is sustainable for the planet and is sustainable for all people on this planet. It is a radically different paradigm that is being born. I'm sure at this point, many of you have heard, or most of you have heard the term paradigm. We're in the midst of a paradigm shift, friends. And there are 2 wonderful publications I would like to recommend to you if you'd like to learn more about the paradigm shift. One was published last year, and the editors are Irvin Laszlo and David Lorimer, and it's called The Upshift. And it really describes, it's a collection of articles that describes the paradigm shift in the midst of which you are being educated and deciding what education is going to mean for you, because that's your choice. And the other one is Our Moment of Choice. It's a comparable collection, but it was published in the US. And it's 43 evolutionary leaders speaking about this moment of choice in between worlds, which is a choice, an informed and conscious choice for each one of us. So what does that mean? There was a psychologist and social scientist in the 1960s by the name of Claire Graves, who noticed that people don't just have different beliefs and different perspectives, that these different worldviews actually are systems and ways of looking at the world. And he began to describe these worldviews. He passed rather early, so his work was continued by Don Beck, and it became what is now known as spiral dynamics. What we have now is, and Don Beck has actually described them very well, are different paradigms, different worldviews of what is valuable and how reality works. From survival worldviews to tribal worldviews to power politics, which is a whole different level of consciousness and worldview and value system, to truth and order perspectives that rely on dominance and order, as you can hear, to strategic enterprises which value merit-based, scientific, entrepreneurial, and pragmatic approaches, to humanistic egalitarian. And what it makes it very difficult at this time is the world is that we have all of these worldviews coexisting and clashing with each other. But here's what's interesting. In my final minute or two, I'd like to explain to you that what is happening now is a consciousness shift between this tier, all of these levels and worldviews, and the next tier of understanding, which is literally a leap into integrative understanding. And that means we don't just have the freedom to clash among those worldviews. We actually have the capacity and the knowledge to learn how to consult across these worldviews, to collaborate in a way that creates sustainable, just institutions. That requires skills of a new order, a vision of a future which is different than anything we've known until now. It is a collaborative future, a partnership-based future, and those are skills for consultation versus debate and argumentation. And along with that, skills for holistic understanding. In closing, I will just introduce to you how the big wholeness that you are all moving into, hopefully, is being described by Ken Wilber, who's a world-renowned philosopher in education and psychology. And he describes the big wholeness as a combination of waking up, which is really realizing the transcendent importance of this moment in time that we're living in and the role of each one of us, growing up, undergoing dramatic development in consciousness by our own choice, okay? Cleaning up, which is what's typically associated with psychological work, not just cleaning up our shadow, but also discovering our strengths, discovering our potential, opening up to our multiple intelligences. Because often what you hear is this string of thought, which is all left brain, cognitive intelligence only, but there's so many other intelligences that should balance that out and make a whole. And then, of course, is showing up, learning what it means to be present, to come alive, as you have come alive. And it's nice to see you stirring and actually looking with curiosity. And he also added two more, and those are linking up and lifting each other up. So these are the aspects of the big wholeness that has the power to create a future different than what we have now. And that power is with each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena, for this inspirational speech. Thomas is waiting for us. it's good to have you online with us,
Hmm.
and the floor is yours.
Look, I today want to speak about imagination and its relationship to science and education, and also foresight. And if you look at Western philosophy, there are very few thinkers that have actually seriously engaged with imagination. One of them is Henry Corbin, who always said that there's a certain strange, peculiar poverty in our present civilization that stems from a lack of understanding of imagination or the imaginal faculty of the human mind. So he argued that the active imagination is a separate faculty, separate from reason. So there's a rational and the imaginal. And in his understanding of active imagination, it's kind of hard to grasp because he really thought of it as the power to create alternative worlds. So I want to ask, how does creative imagination arise? How does it relate to the rational faculty, the dominance of which has led to the current sort of late modernist malaise in science and education? I will argue that image formation is the foundation of all conscious and meaningful subjective experience in humans and also in animals, even in simple organisms. Further, that there are two kinds of images, those of the past and those for the future. So we are in a kind of temporally bidirectional process of image formation, and it's a heart of all conscious experience. And certainly of the experience of time. In a healthy human being, I think these functions are balanced, while a lack of imaginal faculty leads to an entrapment in the past, or how did Piero call it before? The tyranny of concreteness. Combin also stressed the complementarity of the rational and imaginal. Yeah, so he had the same view. But I want to go a little bit deeper and take a bit more of a scientific perspective on this by looking at image formation and imaging, in other words, perception. Now, some physiologists, Holst and Middlestead in the 50s, made an important discovery that's never been properly digested and thought about in philosophy, namely about how animals perceive change or motion in the environment, which is something all animals must be able to do to stay alive. So they found that animals continuously create a multisensory mental image of what has been happening just now. They store that image briefly in working memory and then compare it with the next image created from the split-second processing of what is perceived in the next now. And in this way, they create an internal loop through the past with the help of memory, and it's designed to detect change over time, change in the environment. Let's say a predator coming towards you, or something like that, yeah. So it's absolutely vital for any organism to detect change in the environment, and it's done through this loop through the past, through memory. And indeed, without this kind of continuity or this degree of apperception, as the phenomenologists call it, our sense perceptions would have no meaning whatsoever. So meaning arises through that sense of things developing in time. Now, these are known as afference copy mechanisms. And the one that's stored is concerned with storing observations of the outside world and creating this loop through the past is called ex-afferescence. It gives us the impression of a passage of time that lies behind us. It helps us see change any new information that could represent a risk or an opportunity. So it's a little bit like science, you know, you have an idea of the world that's constantly being corrected. New empirical observations are always evaluated against an earlier model of reality. The model is adjusted or updated. It's basically the scientific method is already there in the way we perceive. But the most interesting thing about the research of these two scientists is that they found another looping process called pre-effervescence, because organisms do not just have the need to register change, they also act in the environment. Because they act, they have to, in a way, imagine the future as it is after the action to see whether it has actually eventuated. In other words, they have to compare sensory perception with an imagined future that is created by their own action. So action forces us to create this second loop through the future. So the philosophical implications are largely ignored. So this second loop through the future is, or reefference, is basically the foundation of what in higher animals is called the imaginal function, which allows us not just to monitor external events from moment to moment, or even to predict their momentum, which is foresight, but to actually plan and monitor our own actions by contemplating the various futures our different optional actions could create. So, in a way, modern rationalist science has had serious difficulties in accommodating this kind of futuring or world-making imaginal function within its objectivist worldview, because it often saw it as something from the realm of fantasy and falsehood, unrelated to reality. So we're in this trap of hyper-realist objectivism. And not least in education, this kind of objectivism is still promoted very strongly. And therefore, we need a more appropriate educational method that actually creates balanced human beings who are able to imagine, and especially to imagine collectively. I have some recommendations to conclude.
Yes, please. Yes.
So basically, our senses tell us what is. Reason is great at analyzing post hoc how elements of the world relate, the order of things, reality as it is. But imagination helps us to picture and choose between different futures. And the exclusive worship of reason has led us into an entrapment and led us to forget that we are actually the creators of images and the creators of worlds, and we're forgetting our own freedom and responsibility. So I would recommend three things. First, to shift away from canonical learning to more explorative, open-ended project work, and the kind of projects where even the teacher does not know the answer or the outcome in advance. Second, that students' imaginations must not be disciplined away but develop to become a force for active, conscious, and responsible creation, a loop into the future from within the now. And that means it would require a system of marking student work that does not constantly reinforce conformity of thinking and the regurgitation of memorized facts. And third and last, imagination is also a collective enterprise of world creations. We don't create the world alone. So, and yet we have, as yet, no provision for encouraging collective imagination in our education systems. In other words, the joint process of envisaging a shared future. It's my last sentence.
Yes.
And then agreeing on actions that need to be taken to make that future arrive. Okay,
Thank you so much.
That's all.
Thank you. Let me try to summarize what we talked here. It seems everyone agrees that to prepare our students for the better future, we need to equip them with new tools and new mindsets, and we need to cooperate, collaborate to do this all together, right? Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you.